She grabbed a total stranger's hand, leaned in close, and whispered 4 words that changed both of their lives forever. "You're my husband, please." Jason Miller hadn't spoken to this woman more than twice in his life. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know her story. But something in her eyes, not desperation, not manipulation, something that looked painfully like survival, made him close his fingers around hers and say nothing at all. What happened on that 10-hour flight wasn't a love story. Not at first. It was 2 broken people accidentally telling each other the truth. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss where this one goes. Jason Miller had a rule about airplane seats. Window seat. Always. No exceptions. It wasn't about the view. A man who spent 12 years crawling inside turbine housings and inspecting engine shafts at 30,000 feet had no romance left for altitude. The window seat was about control. You could lean against the wall. You could angle your body away from whoever landed next to you. You could close your eyes and pretend you were somewhere else entirely, in the backyard, throwing a baseball with your daughter, or at the kitchen table, eating cereal at 6 in the morning, like a normal human being, instead of getting stuffed into a metal tube, headed to California for a project that should have taken 3 emails. Howe was 43 years old, and he had stopped expecting much from the world. That wasn't bitterness. That was just math. When you lose your wife at 36, when you spend the next 7 years learning how to braid hair and sign permission slips and explain death to a child who still sleeps with the nightlight on you, get very practical about what life is and what it isn't. Life was Lily's science fair project, sitting on the kitchen table half-finished. Life was checking the weather before school every morning, because his daughter refused to wear a jacket unless the temperature dropped below 40. Life was Tuesday night phone calls with his mother-in-law, who never blamed him for anything, but whose voice always carried the weight of a woman who had outlived her own daughter. Romance adventure, unexpected moments that changed everything, those were for other people. Younger people. People who still had some elasticity in their expectations. Jason Miller had a window seat and a thermos of black coffee and a paperback novel he'd already read twice, and that was enough. That was exactly enough. Until she sat down. He heard her before he saw her. Not loudly, she wasn't making a scene. It was more like a presence, a kind of energy that moves through a crowded cabin the way weather moves through a valley. He was already settled in headphones around his neck. Novel open on his tray table when the aisle seat shifted and he felt the middle seat compress beside him and heard a woman say quietly, almost to herself, "Okay, okay, you can do this." He didn't look up. Not his business. People said all kinds of things to themselves on planes. Fear of flying, fear of turbulence, fear of the person next to them hogging the armrest. All legitimate anxieties, none of them his problem. Then she said it again. "Okay, you can do this, Megan." Something about saying your own name out loud in a moment of private panic that made him look. She was settling a carry-on bag beneath the seat in front of her, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who has spent years learning to take up as little space as possible in public. She was a full-figured woman, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and a blazer that told him she was traveling for work. She had the kind of face that was built for smiling, wide-open, expressive. But right now, that face was doing something else entirely. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were scanning the cabin like she was running escape route calculations. She wasn't afraid of flying. She was afraid of something on this plane. Jason went back to his book. Or, he tried to. He got through approximately 1 paragraph before the woman beside him exhaled sharply through her nose and said in a voice just barely above a whisper, "I'm about to ask you something crazy." He looked up. She was staring straight ahead, not at him, like she was rehearsing the words to a wall. "You can say no," she said. "I completely understand if you say no, but I need you to know that I am a completely normal, non-dangerous person who is having a genuinely terrible morning. And what I'm about to ask you comes from pure desperation and not from any kind of criminal intent." Jason closed his book. "Okay," he said. She turned and looked at him for the first time. Dark brown eyes. The kind of eyes that have done a lot of watching and not enough being watched. "If anyone asks," she said, "you're my husband." The cabin hummed around them. Somewhere behind them a baby was starting to fuss. The flight attendants were doing their pre-flight walkthrough, checking overhead bins, smiling at people who weren't smiling back. Jason looked at this woman he had met twice at company meetings and whose last name he was genuinely not certain of. "My husband," he repeated. "Yes." "For how long?" "Just this flight. 10 hours. "I know how long it is." He looked at her for a moment. She held his gaze and didn't look away, which he appreciated. People who look you straight in the eye when they're asking for something unreasonable are usually telling the truth about why they need it. "Tell me why," he said, and Megan Carter took a breath and told him. Her name was Megan Carter. She was 34 years old, and she had worked at the same aerospace engineering firm as Jason for 3 years, though they'd operated in different departments and different orbits. Him in maintenance and field operations, her in project management and client relations. She was good at her job, better than good. She had a talent for reading rooms and translating technical chaos into language that clients could actually understand, and she had built her reputation one carefully managed crisis at a time. She was also, according to her mother, still tragically single at 34, which was a problem that needed solving before it became a medical condition. The man her mother had in mind was Richard Crane. Richard Crane was 51 years old and a senior vice president at their company's West Coast division. He had gray at his temples in the way that certain men strategically cultivate, and he drove a car that cost more than Jason's annual salary, and he had been pursuing Megan Carter with the quiet, confident persistence of a man who was not accustomed to being told no. Not because he loved her. Megan was very clear on that point. "He doesn't love me," she said. "He doesn't even know me. He knows what he thinks I should be, and he thinks I'm the raw material for it." She had been turning him down for 2 years. Politely, professionally, carefully, because when you turn down a senior vice president at your own company, you do it the way you handle explosives, with great precision and absolutely no sudden movements. But her mother had gotten involved. And her mother, who operated on a frequency of anxiety that could pick up signals from other dimensions, had somehow connected with Richard Crane at a company event 6 months ago, and had been the recipient of his considerable charm ever since. "She thinks he hung the moon," Megan said. "She calls him a real gentleman. She's told him things about me. Personal things. I don't know exactly what, but I know it's personal because he references them in conversations, in this way that's supposed to feel intimate, but just feels like surveillance." And then her mother had told Richard something that Megan absolutely had not authorized, that her daughter was between relationships and open to reconsidering, which she was not. So Megan had done what any rational person does. When backed into an impossible corner, she lied. She told her mother she was already in a relationship, a serious one. She'd been seeing someone for months, a wonderful man, very stable, very kind, and things were progressing, and she'd been keeping it private because she didn't want pressure, and she would tell everyone when the time was right. Her mother had relayed this information to Richard with presumably great enthusiasm. Richard had gone quiet, and for a few weeks the pressure had stopped. Megan had exhaled for the first time in 6 months. And then this morning, she had arrived at the gate for the 7 a.m. flight to Los Angeles and seen Richard Crane standing 15 feet away at the same gate, boarding pass in hand, and had felt the floor drop out from under her feet. "He must have taken the same project assignment," she said. "I didn't know he'd be on this flight. I didn't know he'd be on this flight, and I panicked and I looked around for any way out and—" She stopped. "And you were there." "And I was there," Jason said. "You looked—" She paused, choosing words with the care of someone who knows they're navigating a minefield. "You looked like someone who wouldn't make it worse." Jason thought about that. What does Richard know about this person you're supposedly seeing? Not much. My mother doesn't know much. I told them he was someone I worked with. That part's at least true now. Something flickered across her face. Not a smile, not exactly. Something smaller and more complicated. "I know this is insane," she said. "I know I could just tell him the truth. I know that's the adult thing to do. But I've been professional and clear and honest with this man for 2 years, and it hasn't worked, and She stopped again. I just need 10 hours where I don't have to defend myself. Is that so much to ask? Jason looked at her for a long moment. She was watching him with an expression he recognized not from romantic history, because that chapter of his life had closed in a hospice room 7 years ago, but from fatherhood. It was the expression his daughter Lily wore when she'd tried everything she knew how to try, and was now placing all remaining hope in him because he was the last option available. It was the expression of someone who was very tired of fighting alone. "Okay," he said. Megan blinked. "Okay, but I have a condition." She stiffened slightly. He saw it and understood it and didn't take it personally. "Not that kind of condition," he said flatly. "I have a daughter who is 12 years old, and I would like to think that in 20 years she lives in a world where a man setting a condition on helping a woman doesn't automatically mean something terrible. So let me finish." Something in Megan's face changed just slightly, just around the edges, like a door that opens an inch before someone decides whether to open it all the way. "My condition," Jason said, "is that we don't make up a story. We don't build some elaborate fiction we have to maintain for 10 hours. We just tell the truth about each other, whatever truth we have." She stared at him. "We don't know each other." "Then we'll find out." His name for the record was Jason Thomas Miller. He told her this like a man filing a formal statement because he figured if they were going to do this, they ought to at least know each other's names. She already knew his. She'd seen it on project rosters. He knew her first name from the same source, and her last from her boarding pass when she'd tucked it into the seat pocket in front of her. "Jason," she said, testing it. "Megan," he replied. "This is very strange. Completely agree. What does Richard look like so I know who we're performing for?" She described him tall, silver-haired, expensive blazer, the particular expression of a man who has confused being wealthy with being right about everything. Jason nodded like he was taking notes. "Does he know what I look like?" "I don't think so. My mother's met you apparently according to this fiction, but Richard only knows you're someone from work. Lucky for us, I look like approximately 40% of the men at this company." "That's weirdly reassuring." "I have a very unremarkable face. It served me well." She laughed. It came out before she could stop it. A short, surprised sound like she'd been holding her breath and something had finally released it. "You don't have an unremarkable face," she said. "You don't have to be nice to me. We're already doing this." "I'm not being nice. I'm being accurate." He looked at her. She was already looking away out toward the aisle, watching the boarding process with those scanning eyes. Jason Miller had not received an unrequested compliment from a woman who wasn't his mother or his daughter in approximately 4 years. He wasn't sure what to do with it, so he filed it away carefully and moved on. "Tell me something true about yourself," he said. "Right now." "We've got 10 hours. Might as well start somewhere." Megan was quiet for a moment. Around them, the plane was filling up the overhead bins, filling the flight attendants, beginning their practiced choreography. The ambient noise of 200 people settling in for a long haul. "I wanted to be a chef," she said finally. He waited. "Not like a hobby thing. I wanted to go to culinary school. I had it all figured out. I was 18. I had a plan. I'd researched programs. I was going to specialize in pastry." She said this last part with a kind of sardonic precision, like she was describing someone else's dream. "My parents thought it was impractical. My dad said I'd end up working 80-hour weeks for poverty wages. My mom said—" She paused. "My mom said it wasn't the kind of career that attracted the right kind of man. So you went into engineering management instead." "Project coordination, but yes." "Do you like it?" She thought about this with more honesty than the question probably required. "I'm good at it," she said finally. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him again. "That door, another inch." "No," she said. "I don't like it. I'm good at it, and it pays well, and some days I can make myself feel okay about those two things being enough." "Some days?" "Some days." He nodded slowly. "Your turn," she said. He thought about what to tell her. He had a lot of truths. Some of them were too heavy for 30,000 feet. Some of them he hadn't said out loud to another person in so long that he wasn't sure he still had the vocabulary for them. "I'm afraid of getting on this plane," he said. She stared at him. "You work in aviation maintenance. I know exactly what can go wrong. That's not a comfort, that's a list." She thought about this. "Fair enough. Lily, my daughter. She made me promise to text her when I land. She's 12 and she acts like she doesn't worry about me. But she sets a calendar reminder to check her phone when I'm supposed to arrive. I found out because she left her phone on the counter once, and I saw the notification go off." He paused. "That's the truest thing about me right now. That my 12-year-old worries about her father and tries to hide it because she doesn't want me to feel guilty." Megan was quiet. "How long have you been doing this alone?" she asked. 7 years. She didn't say she was sorry. He appreciated that more than she knew. "She sounds like a remarkable kid," Megan said. "She's the best person I know," he said simply. "And I'm including myself in that comparison without any false modesty." Richard Crane found them 40 minutes into the flight. Jason had been expecting it. Megan had spotted Richard boarding 3 rows ahead, had reached out and gripped Jason's arm for just a moment. That quick, involuntary grab of someone who has just seen the thing they were afraid of. And Jason had simply placed his hand over hers on the armrest and left it there and said nothing. Because sometimes the most useful thing you can do for another person is occupy space. Richard appeared in the aisle wearing the expression of a man who has rehearsed his casual. "Megan." His voice was the kind of smooth that comes from decades of boardrooms. "I didn't know you were on this flight." Megan looked up from the window with an expression of mild surprise that Jason thought was genuinely impressive under the circumstances. "Richard, hi, small world." Richard's eyes moved to Jason with the specific quality of attention that men give to other men they are sizing up and have already decided don't require serious consideration. "Who's this?" Not rude exactly, but not warm. "This is Jason," Megan said. "My husband." The word landed in the space between them with a kind of quiet precision. Richard's smile stayed in place, but it made a small adjustment, a micro recalculation. "Your husband." He put a slight emphasis on the word, the way a man does when he's asking a question without asking a question. "Jason Miller," Jason said, and offered his hand across Megan in the natural way of a man comfortable with his own space. "Good to meet you." Richard shook it. His grip had the practiced quality of a man who had once read an article about handshakes and power. "I didn't realize you were married," Richard said to Megan specifically, in the tone of a man who definitely had realized it and was recalculating. "We've kept it pretty quiet," Megan said. "How long?" "Long enough," Jason said pleasantly. Richard looked at him again. Really looked this time. Taking in the off-the-rack shirt, the absence of a watch, worth mentioning the general air of a man who had no idea what Richard Crane's car cost, and would not have been impressed if he did. Something passed through Richard's expression. Something that was trying to be dismissive, but was catching just slightly on uncertainty. "What do you do, Jason?" "Aviation maintenance, aircraft systems." "Jason's a lead engineer," Megan said. "Maintenance," Richard repeated with the particular inflection of a man filing something in the wrong drawer. Jason smiled at him. It was a simple, uncomplicated smile, the kind that doesn't reach for anything or apologize for anything. 30,000 feet up, Jason said. "Everything on this plane that keeps you comfortable. The pressurization, the hydraulics, the landing gear that's going to put us down safely in Los Angeles." He let that sit for exactly 1 beat. That's maintenance. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't challenging. It was just a fact stated with the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly what he contributes to the world. Richard's smile recalibrated again. "Well," he said, and that was apparently all he had. "Great to meet you," Jason said again. Richard said something about catching up with Megan at the conference and moved back up the aisle, and Megan turned toward the window and let out a breath so long and slow that Jason could practically feel the weeks of tension leaving her body. "That was," she started. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "He's going to come back." She turned. "You think so? Men like that don't give up after one conversation. They regroup and return with a different angle. He looked at his book. But we've got time. Tell me something else true. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. And she did. What happened over the next 4 hours was not falling in love. Jason Miller was a precise enough thinker to be clear about that with himself and later with anyone who asked. What happened was rarer than falling in love. What happened was that two people decided in the middle of a 10-hour flight over the American continent to simply be honest with each other. No performance, no positioning, no careful management of impression. Just the plain unglamorous truth of who they actually were. Megan told him about the years she'd spent shrinking herself. Not her body, her personality, her opinions, her voice in rooms where she'd calculated that speaking would cost more than silence. I'm very good at reading what a room wants, she said, and adjusting myself to match it. It's a skill, I guess, but it means I've spent about 15 years being whoever the room needed, and I'm not entirely sure I know what I actually am outside of that. You know about the chef thing, Jason said. That was 18 years ago. It's still true, isn't it? The wanting. She looked at him. Yes, she said quietly. It's still true. He told her about the first year after Susan died. How he had functioned completely, had gone to work and made Lily's lunches and attended parent-teacher conferences and done everything a person is supposed to do while feeling like he was operating from a great distance from himself. Like the real Jason Miller was watching all of this from somewhere slightly outside his own body. When did that stop? She asked. I'm not sure it completely has, he said. But Lily started middle school last year, and she had this terrible weak friend drama. Some kind of social catastrophe. I didn't fully understand, and she came home and sat at the kitchen table and cried for 20 minutes, and I just sat there with her. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't know how. I just stayed. He paused. And after a while she said, "Thanks, Dad." And I thought, okay, that's something. That's real. That one I did right. Megan was quiet for a moment. She's lucky, she said finally. I'm the lucky one. That's a very dad thing to say. I'm a very dad person. I know, she said. And then, like she hadn't meant to say it, I don't mean that as an insult. I didn't take it as one. They were somewhere over New Mexico or Arizona. The geography felt irrelevant at that altitude, everything below them reduced to abstract pattern when Megan fell asleep. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Just gradually, the way exhaustion finally claims a person who has been holding themselves upright by sheer determination. Her head listed slightly to the left, and her breathing evened out, and her whole face softened in a way that Jason found himself noticing with an attention that felt both simple and important. She looked when she was asleep like someone who had finally stopped performing. I didn't move. Didn't adjust the armrest. Didn't reclaim his personal space. Just sat there with his book open to a page he wasn't reading, listening to the engine noise, and the distant baby, and the white noise of 200 people suspended in the air between one life and another. He thought about Lily. He thought about Susan. He thought about the fact that he was sitting in a window seat 30,000 feet over the desert, next to a woman who had grabbed his hand and asked him to pretend to be her husband, and somehow in the process of that pretending something true had accidentally happened. He was not sure what to call it. He was not sure he needed to call it anything yet, but he was aware with the quiet precision of a man who has learned to take careful inventory of what matters that he was more present in this moment than he had been in a very long time, and that felt like something worth paying attention to. Megan woke up 40 minutes later to find that Richard Crane had returned. He was standing in the aisle holding a drink from the galley, wearing the expression of a man who has done some thinking and arrived at a new strategy. Megan. His voice was gentler this time, more deliberate. I was hoping we could talk about the Hartfield project. Jason felt her go still beside him, in the way that people go still when they are deciding whether to fight or run and have just realized neither option is really available. Sure, she said, because she was Megan Carter, and Megan Carter always found a way to stay professional. I actually wanted to apologize, Richard said, which was clearly not what she'd expected, because her stillness shifted into something more confused. I think I've made things uncomfortable for you, at work, and that wasn't my intention. How was good, Jason thought. He was genuinely good at this. The apology was real enough to be disarming and vague enough to be deniable. A man who had spent 3 decades in executive positions had learned exactly how to appear sincere without committing to anything. I appreciate that, Megan said carefully. Richard glanced at Jason with the particular quality of a man measuring an obstacle. Your husband's a patient man, he said. The word husband landed differently this time, slightly pointed a small test. He is, Megan said. Must be hard, Richard said to Jason directly now, being married to a woman this dedicated to her career. All the travel, the long hours. It was an elegant trap. Agree, and you've suggested the marriage has strain. Disagree too enthusiastically, and it sounds defensive. Jason looked at Richard with the uncomplicated patience of a man who has diffused more dangerous things than a loaded question. It's not hard, he said. It's just our life. I'm proud of what she does. Richard smiled with his mouth. Of course. She's the best at what she does, Jason said with the simple, flat certainty of a statement of fact. So whatever travel and long hours come with that, that's just what good work looks like. Richard was quiet for exactly long enough to indicate that he was reassessing. Well, he said. The word again. His retreat word. Enjoy the rest of the flight. He moved away. Megan waited until he was 3 rows up, and then turned to Jason with an expression he couldn't quite read. You didn't have to say all that, she said. Which part? The part about being proud of me. The part about me being the best at what I do. Jason looked at her steadily. I wasn't performing, he said. You managed the Hartfield pre-delivery crisis last quarter. You did it in 48 hours with 3 different vendor teams pulling in different directions. I was one of the maintenance leads on that project. He paused. You're the best at what you do. Megan Carter looked at Jason Miller for a long, quiet moment. And that door, the one that had been opening in inches, opened a little further. Neither of them noticed exactly when the pretending stopped. The plane continued west. The engines held. Below them, America spread out in patterns that only made sense from above, the geometry of human life, the roads and rivers and grids. Everything that matters, reduced to texture and shadow. Jason would later try to identify the exact moment things changed. He never could. There was no moment. There was only the slow, cumulative weight of 2 people telling each other the truth for 10 hours, and the impossible ordinary miracle of being heard. But before the plane landed, before any of that, Richard Crane was going to come back one more time. And this time, he wasn't going to be subtle about it. Richard Crane did not go back to his seat. That was the first sign that something had shifted. Jason watched him from the corner of his eye. The way you watch anything potentially dangerous with your attention, just slightly ahead of your expression, and saw Richard settle into an empty row across the aisle, 2 seats up, positioning himself with the practiced casualness of a man who wanted to be visible without appearing to be watching. He was watching. Jason had spent 12 years in aircraft maintenance, and the first thing that job teaches you is the difference between a system that is stressed and a system that is about to fail. Richard Crane was a stressed system. The apology hadn't worked. The subtle probing hadn't worked. And men like Richard, men who had spent 30 years getting what they wanted through charm and positioning, and the quiet pressure of superior rank, did not simply recalculate and retreat. They escalated. They found a new angle. They waited for the moment when your guard was down, and then they applied pressure to the exact point where you were weakest. Jason could feel him waiting from 2 rows away. Beside him, Megan had gone quiet in a different way than before. Not the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had run out of things to say. They hadn't, not even close, but the tight, concentrated quiet of a person who is aware they are being watched and is deciding whether to acknowledge it or pretend they don't notice. He's still there, she said without moving her lips very much. I know. What do you think he wants? I wants to find the crack, Jason said simply. There's always a crack. He's just looking for it. She turned to look at him fully. And is there one? Jason thought about that honestly for a moment, the way he thought about structural problems, not with anxiety, but with genuine analytical attention. Not yet, he said. The not yet was not a threat. It was not a promise. It was just the most accurate thing he could say, and Megan seemed to understand that, because she nodded once and turned back toward the window. The flight tracker on the seatback screen showed them somewhere over the California border. 3 hours left. 3 hours felt like either a very long time or no time at all, depending entirely on what happened next. What happened next was the flight attendant. Her name tag said Carol, and she had the particular energy of someone who had worked long-haul flights for 20 years and had seen every possible variety of human behavior and was no longer surprised by any of it. She stopped at their row with a practiced smile and asked if they needed anything, and Richard, who was close enough to hear, said from across the aisle, in the voice of a man making a social observation rather than an intrusion, "They look pretty settled in, don't they, Carol happy couple?" It was said pleasantly. It was said the way you comment on good weather casually publicly, with the specific social safety of a remark that nobody could reasonably object to. But Jason understood the mechanism. Richard was testing whether a stranger would confirm or destabilize the performance. If Carol laughed awkwardly, if Megan flinched, if Jason hesitated even slightly, any of those reactions would give Richard information. Information he would use. Carol looked at them with the completely neutral assessment of a woman who has no stake in anyone's drama. Jason took Megan's hand off the armrest. It was a simple gesture. Not dramatic, not performed. Just the natural movement of a man who is sitting next to his person and reaches for her hand, because that is what you do. He did it without looking at Richard, without looking at Carol. He just picked up Megan's hand and held it. And then he said to Carol calmly, "We're good, thanks. Maybe some water when you get a chance." Carol smiled and moved on. Richard said nothing. Megan's hand in his was very still for exactly 3 seconds, and then her fingers closed just slightly around his. Neither of them commented on this. 20 minutes passed. The plane moved through a patch of light turbulence, just the ordinary bumping of air at altitude, the kind that sounds worse than it is. And around them, passengers tightened their seatbelts, and the flight attendants sat down, and the overhead compartments rattled their contents in gentle warning. Jason wrote it out without moving, with the physical stillness of a man who has been told by enough cockpit crews about enough close calls that ordinary turbulence registers somewhere below mild inconvenience. Megan, he noticed, had stopped breathing during the worst of it. "It's fine," he said. "I know." "You stopped breathing." "I do that." "Counterproductive." "I'm aware." A pause. Then quietly, "My brother's afraid of flying. I always end up being the calm one when we travel together because he needs me to be. So I learned to look calm." Another pause. Apparently the learning didn't fully take. Jason looked at her. "You don't have to look calm with me," he said. She turned. Something moved through her face. Something that was almost too complicated to name. Like a person hearing a simple sentence in a language they'd forgotten they spoke. "Nobody's said that to me in a long time," she said. "Said what? That I don't have to perform for them." He held her gaze for a moment. "I've been watching you manage every room you've ever been in from 2 rows behind you at the Hartfield meetings. It's impressive, but it looks exhausting." "It is," she said simply. Like she'd never been asked, and so had never said it out loud before. "What's your brother's name?" The question caught her off guard. He could see it in her face, the small surprise of a topic shift. "Danny," she said. "He's 31. He teaches 3rd grade in Columbus." "Tell me about Danny." She looked at him with the expression of a person who keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Why?" "Because you've spent the last hour telling me about the things that went wrong, and the people who made them go wrong, and the version of yourself that exists in relation to all of that. Tell me about something you actually love." It was possibly the most words Jason Miller had strung together about something other than aircraft systems or his daughter in approximately 4 years. He was aware of that as he said it. He was also aware that he meant it. Megan was quiet for a moment. Then she started talking about Danny. She talked about Danny the way you talk about someone when your guard is completely down with the running, overlapping associative logic of genuine affection. Danny, who still called her every Sunday morning. Danny, who cried at insurance commercials and was completely unashamed about it. Danny, who had taught himself to cook their grandmother's recipes after she passed, because someone had to hold on to them, and who had called Megan from his kitchen at 11 p.m. one night to triumphantly report that he'd finally gotten the texture of her biscuits right. "He sent me a photo," Megan said, and she was smiling now, a real one, unrehearsed. The biscuits looked terrible. They were completely flat, but he was so happy. "Did you tell him they looked terrible?" "I told him they looked perfect and that Grandma would have been proud." And then I hung up and laughed for about 10 minutes. She looked at her hands. "He probably knew. He always knows when I'm lying to protect him. He does the same thing for me. He sounds like a good person. He's the best person I know." She paused, then looked at Jason. "You said that about your daughter?" "Yeah. Do you think that means we have good taste in people, or that we've been lucky in specific people?" Jason thought about this with genuine attention. "I think it means we've paid attention to the right things," he said finally. "Lily didn't become the person she is by accident. Danny didn't either. Those people existed because someone loved them in a way that let them." Megan was very still. "Your wife," she said carefully. Not a question exactly, more like an opening she was offering him. He'd known this was coming. Had known since she fell asleep 40 minutes ago, and he'd had time to think about the architecture of this conversation and where it was inevitably going. He had the conversation he always had when it came up, the clean, brief, functional version that answered the question without making anyone uncomfortable, the version that contained all the relevant facts and almost none of the truth. He didn't give her that version. "Her name was Susan," he said. "She was a physical therapist. She coached Lily's soccer team the year before she got sick, even when she was already having symptoms, because she'd made a commitment to those kids and she didn't believe in breaking commitments." He stopped for a moment, because even now, 7 years later, certain specific facts landed differently than the general weight of loss. "She never complained. I wanted her to. I used to get angry about it that she wouldn't tell me how scared she was, because I thought I needed her to, so I could feel like I was doing something. But she wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting me. And Lily." He exhaled slowly. "I understand that now. I didn't then." Megan didn't say she was sorry. She hadn't before, and she didn't now, and he was grateful for the consistency of it. Instead, she said, "What did you do when you found out you were angry about it? What did you do with that?" Nobody had ever asked him that. Not his mother-in-law, not his few close friends, not the one session of grief counseling he'd attended before deciding it wasn't for him. "I fixed things," he said. "For a whole year I fixed every broken thing in that house. The gutters, the fence, the garage door, the step on the back porch that had been squeaking for 6 years. Everything I could get my hands on." He paused. "I think I was trying to prove that I could make things not broken, even when I couldn't." Megan said nothing for a long moment. "Did it help?" "The gutters are in very good shape," he said. She laughed. That surprised sound again, the one that came out before she could manage it. She covered her mouth with her free hand, the one that wasn't still loosely connected to his. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's not—" "It's funny," he said. "It was a little bit funny even when I was doing it. I knew it was displacement. I have a basic understanding of human psychology. But the gutters needed to be cleaned anyway, so—" She was still smiling, but there was something underneath it that wasn't funny at all, and they both knew it, and neither of them tried to resolve it into something simpler than it was. That was Jason would think later when he knew she was different. Not because of the smile or the laugh or the brown eyes or any of the inventory a man takes when he's trying to talk himself into or out of something, but because she had let his complicated thing stay complicated. She hadn't tried to fix it or resolve it or redirect it into something more manageable. She'd just held it with him for a moment, and then they'd moved on. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, a great deal. I was thinking about this sitting with the quiet of it when Richard Crane walked back down the aisle and stopped at their row. This time, there was no pretext. No Carol the flight attendant. No casual social observation. No warm-up. Richard stood in the aisle with his drink in one hand and looked at Megan with the expression of a man who has decided to be direct and has told himself this is a virtue. "I'd like 5 minutes," he said. "Just to talk, professionally. "We're good here, Richard," Megan said. "5 minutes." His eyes moved to Jason with the specific acknowledgement of a man who is technically including someone in a conversation while actually dismissing them from it. You don't mind, do you, Jason? I just have a few things I need to run through with her before we land." It was elegantly done. The question was posed to Jason, but the answer was presumed, because what kind of husband objects to his wife having a 5-minute professional conversation? The objection would look territorial. It would look insecure. It would look like exactly the kind of crack Richard was waiting to find. Jason looked up at Richard Crane. "I wasn't angry." Anger would have been easy, and easy was usually wrong. He thought about aircraft systems again, about the way a well-designed component responds to stress, not by braking, but by distributing the load. He thought about Lily at 12 years old, holding herself together through a terrible week, because she'd learned from somewhere that sometimes you just absorb the hit and keep going. "Of course I don't mind," Jason said pleasantly. "But I think you should know she'll have told me everything you said before we get off this plane anyway. That's just how we work." Richard stared at him. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't possessive. It was just a statement of fact about two people who had apparently no secrets from each other. Richard recalculated again. His expression did that micro-shift, the almost imperceptible adjustment of a strategy being revised in real time. "Right," he said. And then the full turn. "Megan, I think you know that your mother has shared some things with me that suggest your situation might not be exactly what you've represented." The temperature in the row changed. Megan went completely still. Jason watched her hands in her lap close into something that was not quite a fist. "What did my mother tell you?" she asked, and her voice was perfectly level, which Jason recognized as a significant effort. Nothing specific, just that she was surprised by some of the recent developments. Richard's smile was gentle and entirely merciless. "I've known your mother for a while now, Megan. She's a wonderful woman, but she's not great at keeping things to herself when she's worried about her daughter." The implication hung in the recycled air of the aircraft cabin like smoke. He knew. Or he suspected enough to know. Or he was bluffing with enough specific detail to make the bluff indistinguishable from knowledge. Any of those three possibilities arrived at the same destination. Megan Carter was about to be publicly cornered on an airplane with nowhere to go and 3 hours left to fly. Jason felt her start to fold. It was not a visible thing. It was the way her shoulders moved barely just a fraction, the way her chin dipped, the way her whole body oriented itself into the posture of someone preparing to absorb impact and explain themselves. He'd seen it before. He'd seen it at the Hartfield meetings, when the client turned on her, when the vendor pushed back, when the room needed someone to blame, and she was the most accessible target. She always absorbed it. She always found a way to make it work. She was about to do it again. And something in Jason, not protective instinct, not chivalry, not the performance of a fake husband, something much simpler and much older and much more genuine than any of those things moved in him. He thought about Susan in that soccer field coaching those kids through symptoms she hadn't told anyone about yet, not breaking her commitments because she'd made them. He thought about Megan telling him 40,000 feet over the Arizona desert. "I've spent about 15 years being whoever the room needed, and I'm not entirely sure I know what I actually am outside of that." He thought about a 34-year-old woman who wanted to be a chef and cooked for other people as her only remaining form of self-expression, and had spent 2 years professionally, carefully, repeatedly saying no to a man who had simply decided her no was negotiable. Jason put down his book. He looked at Richard Crane with the calm, uncomplicated directness of a man who is not performing anything. "How long have you been pursuing her?" he asked. Richard blinked. "I'm sorry." "You heard me. How long?" A beat of silence. Around them, the cabin had the particular quality of quiet that gathers when the people in the nearby rows realize something is happening and stop pretending they're not listening. "I don't think that's—" 3 years, Jason said. "Give or take, that's what I've heard. 3 years of pursuit by a man in a senior position toward a woman who reports, however indirectly, to the same organization." He kept his voice easy, conversational. The voice of a man making a factual observation over coffee. That's a significant amount of time to spend on someone who has said no consistently. Richard's expression had gone careful in the way that powerful people's expressions go careful when they realize a conversation has turned onto ground they didn't choose. "This is a personal matter," Richard said. "You made it professional when you involved her mother through a company relationship," Jason said. "You made it professional when you booked yourself onto this flight and came back to this row 3 times. He paused. "You made it personal when you just told her that her mother is worried about her." How was not loud. He was not aggressive. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his posture, didn't do any of the things that men do when they are performing their protectiveness for an audience. He just said the true things, in order with the patience of a man who has had this clarity about a situation for a while now and is simply articulating it. Richard looked at him with the expression of a man who has been taken completely off his script. "I genuinely care about Megan," he said, "and it might have even been partially true. I think she's capable of so much more than—" "Than what?" Jason asked. Richard stopped. "Finish that sentence," Jason said. Not unkindly, genuinely. Richard did not finish the sentence. Because the end of that sentence, more than what she is, more than what she looks like, more than the life she's built for herself, was not something he could say out loud in an airplane aisle to a woman and her husband and the 12 surrounding passengers who had stopped reading their books. The silence lasted exactly long enough to contain everything that sentence would have said. "I think," Jason said quietly, "that you've spent a long time looking at her and seeing everything you think needs to be different. And I think you should consider the possibility that that's information about you, not about her." Richard Crane stood in the aisle of a Boeing 737 at 32,000 feet and had nothing to say. That had probably not happened to him in a very long time. Megan was completely still beside Jason. He couldn't read her expression without looking at her directly, and he didn't want to look at her directly right now, because looking at her directly would have made this about her reaction instead of about the truth of what had just been said. Richard said very quietly, "I'll leave you to the rest of your flight." He went back to his seat. This time he didn't look over. Jason picked up his book. The page was still the same one he'd been on for 4 hours. He still wasn't reading it. Beside him, Megan didn't say anything for a long time. The turbulence had settled. The engines maintained their steady, untroubled note. Somewhere in the back of the plane, the baby had finally gone to sleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. You made it sound real." He was quiet for a moment. "Some of it was real," he said. She didn't ask him what he meant by that. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she needed time to process the fact that a stranger, a colleague she'd spoken to twice, whose hand she'd grabbed in desperation, 20,000 feet over Ohio, had just said out loud, and in public, the exact things she had spent 3 years wishing someone would say. Maybe that was too much to take in all at once. "Thank you," she said finally. "Don't." "Jason, you don't thank someone for telling the truth about you," he said. That's just saying it out loud. It was already true." She turned to look at him. He was looking at his book, still not reading it. He was aware of her looking at him. He let her look without turning, without performing anything, without trying to manage what she might be seeing. After a moment, she said, "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Yeah," he said. "I applied to culinary school 6 months ago, for next fall." He looked up. "I haven't told my mother. I haven't told Danny. I filled out the application at 2 in the morning and submitted it before I could change my mind, and then I've been just sitting with it, for 6 months. He looked at her fully. "Did you get in?" She hesitated. Just one beat. "I got in," she said. He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Yeah, okay." He thought for a moment. "What are you waiting for?" She let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more raw than that. "Everything. I'm waiting for everything to make sense. I'm waiting for it to feel less terrifying. I'm waiting for—" She stopped. "I'm waiting for someone to tell me I'm allowed." Jason looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Megan," he said. "Yeah, you're allowed." She looked at him. Those brown eyes that had been scanning escape routes since the moment she sat down were completely still now. Not calculating, not performing, just there, present. Looking at him the way people look at someone when they are deciding whether or not to trust them with something important. She must have made a decision because she exhaled slow and deep, the kind of exhale that carries the weight of 6 months of held breath. And then she leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes and said very quietly, "Okay." The plane continued west. The light through the window had shifted to the particular gold of late afternoon California time, and the landscape below them had changed from desert patterns to something greener, more dense, the Pacific coast beginning to reach up toward them from the edge of the horizon. 2 hours to landing. Jason Miller sat in his window seat and held his book and did not read a single word. I was thinking about a 12-year-old girl who set calendar reminders because she worried about her father. He was thinking about a woman who had applied to culinary school at 2 in the morning and never told anyone. He was thinking about the strange specific grace of being fully seen by a person who had no reason to look that carefully. And he was thinking for the first time in 7 years, with something that felt more like curiosity than grief about what came next. 2 hours to landing, and the plane had gone quiet, in the way that long flights go quiet in the final stretch. Not peaceful exactly, but resigned. The collective energy of 200 people who had run out of distractions and were now just waiting for the ground. Jason was still not reading his book. He'd given up the pretense about 20 minutes ago. Closed it, set it on his tray table, and was now doing what he did best in situations that required no immediate action. He was thinking. Methodically. The way he thought through a maintenance problem, not with urgency, but with the patient, careful attention of a man who knows that rushing a diagnostic is how you miss the thing that matters. What he was thinking about was this. In the last 6 hours, he had learned more about the woman sitting beside him than he knew about people he'd worked with for years. And not surface things, not job titles and commute times and what people order for lunch. He knew that she'd applied to culinary school at 2 in the morning because 2 in the morning was the only hour when her judgment wasn't being managed by everyone else's expectations. He knew that she cooked for people as a form of love because it was the one language she'd been allowed to keep. He knew that she had a brother named Danny who cried at insurance commercials and had called her from his kitchen at 11 p.m. to report a biscuit breakthrough. He knew that she was the bravest person on this airplane and that she had spent years being convinced of the opposite. He was thinking about all of this when Megan suddenly said without preamble, "Tell me about the worst day." He turned to look at her. Which worst day? The worst one. The one you don't usually tell people about. I was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know which day she meant. He knew exactly which day she meant, the same way you always know which scar is the deepest, even when you're not looking at it. "The day I told Lily," he said. Megan didn't move. "She was 5, he said. Susan had been gone for 11 days. I'd been keeping it together in that specific functional way that I think is mostly adrenaline and denial. And I'd been letting Lily ask where Mommy was and telling her she was resting, she was getting better, she needed quiet. 11 days of that." He stopped. "I sat her down at the kitchen table. I had this whole thing prepared. I'd talked to a child psychologist on the phone and taken notes, and I knew exactly what words to use and exactly what not to say and exactly how to frame it." He stopped again. "And then I sat down across from this 5-year-old girl with her mother's eyes, and I opened my mouth and I forgot every single word. Every single one. I just started crying. Couldn't stop. Just sat there at my own kitchen table completely falling apart in front of my daughter." Megan made a very small sound. Not a word. Just a breath. "Lily climbed out of her chair," Jason said. "Walked around the table, patted me on the arm." He exhaled slowly. 5 years old. "She patted me on the arm and said, 'It's okay, Daddy. I know Mommy's not coming back.'" He paused. "She'd known for days. She'd known, and she'd been protecting me by pretending she didn't. She was 5 years old, and she was already protecting me." The silence between them had the quality of something held very carefully. "She sounds so much like you," Megan said quietly. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The protecting, the managing, taking care of everyone else, and hiding how much it costs. She held his gaze. She learned it somewhere. Jason opened his mouth, closed it. He had never once in 7 years thought about it from that direction, that the thing Lily did, the thing that broke his heart because she was too young to have learned, it was something she had learned from watching him. It landed in him with the specific weight of a truth you weren't ready for. "I don't know what to do with that," he said honestly. "Neither do I," she said. "I'm just saying it because it's true." He nodded slowly. One of those nods that isn't agreement so much as acknowledgement. "Yes, I heard that. Yes, I will need to sit with it for a long time. Yes, that particular door is going to stay open now whether I want it to or not." "Your turn," he said. "I already went." "The culinary school thing. That was big." "I know it was. Give me another one." She looked at her hands in her lap. The same hands that had gripped his arm when she'd spotted Richard boarding, that had closed around his fingers on the armrest, that had been very still and then not still at all in the last 6 hours of this flight. "3 years ago," she said. "I was dating someone. It lasted 8 months. His name was Marcus, and he was kind and smart, and he cooked terrible food and laughed at himself about it, which I loved." She paused. "About 6 months in, I started noticing that I was editing myself. Leaving things out. Not lying, just curating. Choosing the version of myself that I thought he would most comfortably receive." She stopped. "By month 8, I had become so good at it that I realized one day I couldn't remember what I actually thought about things anymore. Not my opinions about real things. Just my own interior landscape had gone quiet because I'd been managing it for someone else's comfort for so long." Jason said nothing. "I broke up with him," she said. "He didn't understand why. I couldn't explain it in a way that made sense without sounding like I was blaming him for something he didn't do, because he hadn't done anything. He'd just received what I offered, and I'd offered the edited version, and then I'd resented him for only knowing the edited version." She exhaled. "That's not fair. I know that's not fair. But I also know that I've done it in every relationship I've ever had. With men. With my mother. Probably with Danny, even though he's better at catch than most people." "You're not doing it now," Jason said. She looked at him. "Right now," he said. "You're not editing." She was quiet for a moment, and he saw her notice it, really notice it. Like a person who has been walking with a limp for so long, they'd stopped feeling it, and then someone pointed it out, and suddenly they could feel the absence of the limp, which was its own strange sensation. "No," she said. "I'm not." "Why do you think that is?" She thought about it honestly, which was one of the things he had come to appreciate about her in the last several hours, she thought, before she answered, even when the answer was uncomfortable. "Because you're not waiting for a specific version of me," she said finally. You don't have an image of me in your head that I'm supposed to match. You're just asking questions and listening to what I actually say." She paused. "That's rarer than it sounds." "I know," he said. "Does Lily do that, ask and listen?" He smiled just slightly. "She does. She gets it from Susan, I think. Susan was the best listener I've ever known. She had this, she'd just go completely still, like everything else stopped and you were the only thing happening. You felt it when she listened to you, like being held." Megan was watching him. "You still love her very much," she said. "Always," he said simply. "That doesn't..." He searched for the right word. "That doesn't close anything off. I don't think love works that way. The real kind." Something shifted in Megan's face. Something quiet and significant. "My mother thinks it does," she said. "She thinks loving someone new means you've finished with the old love, like it's a sequence." She paused. "That's why she wants me with Richard. She thinks it would mean I'd moved on from Marcus, from all of it. A clean slate. A fresh start." "Clean slates aren't real," Jason said. "You bring yourself to every start. There's no fresh version of you that materializes when the situation changes." "I know that." "Does your mother?" "My mother," Megan said with the particular tone of a daughter who has spent years navigating love and exasperation in equal measure, "believes that the right circumstances will eventually produce the right person, that you can engineer happiness if you control enough of the variables." "How's that working out for her?" Megan laughed, short and real. She's been married to my father for 40 years, and she loves him genuinely and completely, which she attributes to having made the correct practical choice at 26. She shook her head. And maybe she's right. Maybe for her it was. But I can't. She stopped. I can't marry someone because they have the right variables. I've tried to want that. I've really tried. What do you want instead? She was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that means the answer exists, but the person is deciding whether to trust the room with it. I want someone to ask me questions, she said finally. Real ones. Not interview questions. Not what are your 5-year goals questions. I want someone who notices what I didn't say and asks about that instead. She looked at him sideways. Someone who knows the difference between me being fine and me being fine. Jason held her gaze. You're not fine, he said. She blinked. Right now, he said. You're not fine. You're terrified. You've been terrified since you got on this plane, and probably since long before that. But you got on anyway, and you asked a stranger to hold your hand through it, and you told him about culinary school at 2 in the morning, and you didn't edit yourself once. He paused. That's not fine. That's better than fine. That's brave. Megan Carter looked at Jason Miller in the window seat of a Boeing 737 somewhere over the California coast, and her eyes did something that she clearly didn't intend. They filled just at the edges, just enough to be visible if you were paying the kind of attention he had learned to pay. She didn't let them spill. She blinked and tilted her head back slightly, and took the kind of controlled breath that people take when they are refusing to cry in public on an airplane because they have some dignity. Thank you. Don't do that, she said, her voice completely steady, except for a very slight roughness at the edges. Do what? Say true things in that voice. What voice? That quiet, certain voice. Like you've thought about it and you actually mean it. I do actually mean it. I know, she said. That's the problem. That was the moment, though neither of them would have named it as such. Not yet. Not for weeks. That was the moment the architecture of the next year of both their lives began to take shape. Not in any dramatic way. Not with music or revelation. Just two people sitting in a row of seats in the sky. One of them refusing to cry, and the other one not looking away, and something between them going from temporary to something harder to name. And then Richard Crane walked back down the aisle, and this time he had someone with him. Her name was Patricia Huang, and she was the head of West Coast HR for their company, and she had apparently been in first class this entire flight, which was information. Jason filed away with the grim recognition that the universe has a particular sense of humor about timing. Patricia was 50-something, sharp-eyed with the carefully neutral expression of someone whose entire professional existence was built on listening to both sides of every story before reacting to either. She and Richard stopped at the row together, and Richard's face had the specific quality of a man who believes he has assembled a winning coalition. I'm sorry to interrupt, Patricia said, which was the most thorough apology Jason had ever heard delivered with zero sincerity. Richard was sharing some concerns. I thought it might be easier to address them now rather than let them become issues on site. Megan straightened. The editor came back, not the hollow version, but something different, something with a spine in it. What concerns? He mentioned some confusion about your working relationship. Patricia looked at Jason. And about whether a personal relationship between colleagues might present a conflict of interest issue on the project. There it was. Richard's new angle. Not emotional pressure, not charm, not appeals to her mother's worry. A professional complaint. On an airplane an hour before landing with the head of HR standing in the aisle. It was objectively a masterful pivot. Jason almost admired the engineering of it. Almost. He looked at Patricia with the same uncomplicated directness he'd used on Richard 3 hours earlier. Megan and I work in different departments with no reporting relationship and no overlapping decision authority on any active project, he said. I'm maintenance operations, she's client project management. The Hartfield project is the only one we've both touched, and our work streams don't intersect. He paused. If Richard has a conflict of interest concern, The correct filing is a written report submitted through your portal within 10 business days of the perceived conflict. We'd both be happy to provide documentation. Another pause. Is that what he's doing? Patricia looked at Richard. Richard said nothing. Because if it is, Jason continued pleasantly, then this conversation is actually a procedural step, and you'd want to document it properly. Which means you'd also want to document the context, including that the concern was raised verbally, mid-flight, by a senior employee about a junior colleague he has previously pursued in a personal capacity. Patricia's expression did not change. It was a remarkable piece of professional composure, that expression. But something behind her eyes, something in the quality of her attention shifted in a way that told Jason she was recalibrating very quickly and very quietly. I see, she said. I'm not trying to make this complicated, Jason said. I'm just pointing out that the documentation would need to include all of the relevant context, for accuracy. Richard's jaw had gone very tight. Richard, Patricia said, and there were volumes of information in the way she said it. A woman with 30 years of HR experience communicating clearly and without any possibility of misinterpretation that this had been a mistake and they were leaving now. Richard looked at Megan. Something passed through his face that Jason didn't fully understand. And not anger, not calculation, but something almost like grief. The specific grief of a man who has realized that the gap between who he wanted to be in a situation and who he actually was had just been illuminated for an audience. I hope the project goes well, Richard said to Megan. His voice was quiet, almost human. Thank you, Megan said. Her voice was completely level, a professional to the last. They moved back up the aisle, Patricia's hand at Richard's elbow in the specific way of a person physically steering a situation away from further damage. Jason picked up his book again, set it down again, couldn't even pretend. Beside him, Megan was absolutely still for 30 seconds. He counted without meaning to the way you count anything when you're waiting to see what happens next. Then she turned to him and said very quietly, "Where did you learn to do that?" Do what? That. The procedure and documentation thing. The way you said it. I've filed a lot of HR complaints in 12 years of maintenance, he said. Systems are broken all the time. You learn how to document it. She stared at him. You just HR jitsu'd a senior vice president on an airplane. I stated facts in the correct order. Jason. What? That was... She shook her head. You need to know that was extraordinary. It really wasn't. I'm going to need you to accept this one compliment. He looked at her. Okay. Okay. Thank you. You're welcome. She let out a long, slow breath. Do you think he'll actually file something? No, Jason said. Patricia will talk him out of it before they land. She's good at her job. And Richard isn't stupid. He knows what that filing would look like with the context included. He paused. He's done. He's not happy about it, but he's done. How can you tell? The way he looked at you when he left, Jason said. That wasn't strategy. That was... He thought about it. That was a man who had a picture in his head of how this was going to go, and reality refused to match it. That feeling usually produces a certain kind of exit. Megan was quiet for a moment. Has reality ever refused to match a picture you had in your head? She asked. He looked at her. Every day for 7 years, he said. She nodded slowly. And what do you do with that? I get up, he said. I make Lily's lunch. I go to work. I come home. A pause. And I try to pay attention to the actual thing instead of the picture I had of it. Because the actual thing is usually different from the picture. Not worse, just different. She absorbed this. I have a picture in my head, she said carefully, of what my life was supposed to look like. The career path, the relationship timeline, the way I was supposed to arrive at 34. Her voice was even, but underneath it something was moving, something that was not quite controlled. And basically none of it matches. And for a long time that felt like failure, like I'd gotten the instructions wrong somewhere. And now... She looked at him for a long moment. Right now, she said, sitting in seat 24B on a flight. I almost didn't take next to a man I grabbed by the hand because I was out of options. She stopped. Right now, it feels less like failure and more like... She searched for the word. Like the instructions were wrong. Not me. Something in Jason went very still. The instructions were wrong, he said. Yeah. That's... He stopped. Megan, that's everything. She looked at him, not entirely sure what he meant. That's the whole thing, he said. That's the thing I spent 3 years trying to figure out how to tell Lily without having the words for it. That when the life doesn't match the plan, it's not automatically the life that's the problem. He paused. I couldn't find a way to say it. You just said it in one sentence. She looked at him with an expression that was open in a way that was almost uncomfortable, not because there was anything wrong with it, but because it was so unfamiliar. Like a room with all the windows open and clean air coming through. What did you tell Lily instead? She asked. I told her that maps are just someone else's description of a place, he said. The place is still real whether the map is right or wrong. You still have to walk it yourself. Megan said nothing for a moment. That's pretty good too, she said. She didn't buy it either, he said. She told me it sounded like something off a motivational poster. Megan laughed full and real, the version that didn't get edited before it arrived. The version that used her whole face. He heard it and felt something in his chest do a thing he hadn't felt in long enough that it took him a moment to identify it. He wanted to make her laugh again. Not as a performance. Not as a strategy. Just the plain, honest wanting of a man who has heard a sound he didn't know he'd been missing. He filed this away carefully, the way he filed everything important, and said nothing about it. 1 hour, she said, looking at the flight tracker. 1 hour. She looked at her hands. He looked at the seat back in front of him. What happens when we land? She asked. I thought about the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. In 1 hour, the fiction they'd built would have its natural conclusion. The plane would put them down in Los Angeles. The cabin doors would open. They would collect their carry-ons and join the stream of people moving toward baggage claim and ground transportation, and the particular world of seat 24A and 24B. The world where two strangers told each other things they hadn't told anyone else would dissolve back into the ordinary. We go to the conference, he said. Right. Do our jobs. Right. And then... He stopped. She waited. And then I don't know, he said. I genuinely don't know, Megan. She looked at him. Is that okay? That you don't know? He thought about it honestly. Yeah, he said. Surprisingly, yes, it is. She nodded slowly. He could see her processing that the idea that someone could sit comfortably in not knowing could hold uncertainty without it becoming panic. He thought she might be trying to borrow some of that comfort, the way you borrow warmth when you're cold, and someone nearby has more of it. I've never applied to anything in my life without knowing exactly what it led to, she said. Culinary school is the first thing I've done that way. I applied before I knew what came after. And it's been 6 months of not knowing, and I haven't slept correctly once. But you haven't unapplied, he said. She blinked. Hadn't thought of it that way. No, she said. I haven't. Then you already know what you're doing, he said. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. She held his gaze for a long moment. Jason. Yeah. When we land. She stopped, started again. I know this has been. I know today was. I needed something and you gave it to me, and I don't want to. She was struggling. He could see it, the editor fighting the authentic voice for control of the sentence. I don't want to pretend this was nothing, she said finally. But I also don't know how to name what it was. He nodded. Then don't name it, he said. Let it be what it is and see what it does. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The instructions are wrong, she said. The instructions are wrong, he confirmed. She nodded once the way you nod when something settles, when it clicks from uncertain into clear, not because the uncertainty is resolved, but because you've made your peace with carrying it. Below them, Los Angeles was beginning to appear, the great geometric sprawl of it, pulling up toward the plane as they began their descent, the world reasserting its existence after 10 hours of sky. 40 minutes to landing. Jason Miller was aware with the specific clarity of a man who has learned through years of loss to pay attention to the moments that matter, that something was happening. Not a conclusion. Not a beginning exactly. Something more like the exact point where two different roads merge into one, and neither traveler has quite registered yet that they're no longer walking alone. I was also aware. And this was the part that lived underneath everything quieter and more dangerous than any of the rest, that he had not wanted a flight to end less in his entire life. He was thinking about how to hold that feeling carefully, how to carry it off this airplane without breaking it. When the woman beside him reached over and picked up his hand from the armrest, not grabbing this time, not the desperate grip of panic, just picking it up. The way you pick up something that belongs to you. She held it and looked out the window at Los Angeles coming up to meet them and said nothing at all. And Jason Miller, who had a rule about airplane seats and no expectations left for altitude, and a window seat he'd chosen for the control it offered him, looked at their hands and said nothing either. Because some things are true before you have words for them, and the truest ones usually don't need any. The wheels touched down at 4:47 p.m. Pacific time. Jason felt the runway come up through the fuselage, the way he always did, not as a passenger, but as a maintenance engineer. Reading the landing in the vibration, the brake pressure, the specific drag of the thrust reversers doing their job. Everything nominal. Everything exactly as it should be. The plane slowed, turned, taxied toward the gate, with the unhurried certainty of a machine that had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Around them the cabin immediately became a different place. Seatbelts clicking open before the sign went off. Overhead, bins rattling, phones coming alive with the accumulated notifications of 10 hours. The digital world reasserting itself with all its noise and urgency and demands. 200 people remembering simultaneously that they had lives to return to. Megan let go of his hand. Not abruptly. Not with any drama. Just let go the way you release something when you know the moment for holding it has passed. She straightened in her seat, smoothed her blazer, reached for her phone with the precise automatic movements of a woman shifting back into professional mode. Jason watched this transformation happen and said nothing about it because he understood it. He'd done the same thing 1,000 times. The putting on of the version of yourself that the next situation requires. It was not dishonesty. It was just the way people navigate between their interior life and the world that is waiting for them outside the airplane door. But he noticed it. He filed it away. Her phone came alive with notifications. He heard the rapid succession of Buzz's messages, emails, the delayed cascade of 10 hours of communications, and watched her face move through expressions she probably wasn't aware she was making. Something tightened around her eyes when she read one specific message. Just slightly. Just enough. "Everything okay?" he asked. "My mother," she said. And then after a pause, "She talked to Richard." He went still. "When?" "Apparently during the flight. He has international texting." Her voice was controlled, but underneath it, he could hear the specific strain of a person who has just seen a problem they hoped was resolved reopen in a new location. "She's asking me to call her when I land. The message says..." She stopped reading aloud. "What does it say?" Megan looked at her phone, then at him, then back at the phone. "It says, and I quote, 'Richard told me you've been going through some things and he's worried about you. He says you seem unhappy. I think we should talk, sweetheart. Really talk.'" She put the phone face down on her tray table. "He went to my mother," she said with the quiet flatness of someone absorbing a blow they should have seen coming but didn't. "He lost every other angle, so he went to my mother." Jason let that land for a moment before he said anything. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." She picked the phone back up, looked at it, set it down again. "I've been lying to her for 6 months, about being in a relationship, about all of it. And she's worried, and she reached out to him because she thought he was a safe person, and he used that." She stopped. "She used her worry for me as a weapon, against me." "Your mother didn't?" Jason said carefully. "Your mother is worried about her daughter. Richard used that." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. You're right. I know you're right. A pause. I'm still angry. That's appropriate. The plane docked at the gate. The jetway connected with its familiar clunk and hiss, and the forward cabin door opened, and the stream of passengers began moving. Jason and Megan were in the middle of the plane, which meant they had a few minutes before the aisle cleared enough to move. A few minutes that felt suddenly both too long and not nearly long enough. You're going to have to call her, he said. I know. And tell her the truth. I know. She exhaled. All of it. I thought about this. The parts that protect her, he said. The parts that explain why you did what you did without making her feel like a fool for being worried. The parts that tell her who you actually are, not who she thinks you are. He paused. She's your mother. She can handle it. You don't know my mother. No, but I know you. And you came from somewhere. She stared at him. That is the most optimistic thing you've said in 10 hours. I have my moments. Something moved through her face, that door wider than it had ever been. Jason, she said. Whatever this was. It was real, he said simply. She stopped. Whatever else it was, or wasn't, or might be, he said. It was real. Don't let it become something you manage in retrospect. She held his gaze for a moment that lasted exactly long enough to be significant and not 1 second longer. Then the aisle cleared beside them, and the moment shifted the way moments do into something that required movement. They collected their carry-ons. They moved through the jetway with the flow of other passengers back into the terminal, back into the fluorescent reality of LAX, with its ambient noise and its signage, and its peculiar smell of jet fuel and fast food, and the specific exhaustion of people in transit. They walked out of the gate together, without deciding to, without discussing it. At the point where the corridor opened into the terminal concourse, they stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the airport moved people with purpose, people with luggage, people who had somewhere specific to be and were going there with the focused velocity of the American traveler. All of it completely indifferent to the two people standing still in the middle of it, trying to find the right words for something that had no existing vocabulary. Conference starts tomorrow morning, Megan said finally. 8 a.m., he said. I have a 7 a.m. breakfast meeting with the client team. I have a site inspection at 9. A pause. So, she said. So, he said. It was not objectively a sophisticated exchange. Two people saying a word that meant nothing and everything, marking the place where one kind of time ended and another kind began. Text me, she said, when you've heard from Lily. He looked at her. You remembered the calendar reminder thing. I remembered everything, she said. He stood with that for a moment. Then he nodded, once picked up his bag, and walked toward the rideshare exit. He did not look back because looking back was not something Jason Miller did. Not because he was incapable of it, but because he had learned the hard way that looking back while you're still moving tends to be how people walk into things. But he heard her, moving in the other direction. And he was aware with the full, deliberate attention of a man who has chosen to be present in this moment of the exact sound of her footsteps receding into the terminal noise until they were gone. He pulled out his phone and sent Lily a text. Landed. All good. Call you tonight. Her response came in 43 seconds. He counted. It was a single emoji. The kind that is trying very hard to look casual and failing completely. He smiled at his phone the whole way to the hotel. The conference lasted 4 days. In those 4 days, Jason saw Megan 11 times. He counted those too, though he told himself he wasn't in the same way. He'd told himself he wasn't counting Lily's calendar reminders. He had a habit of tracking the things that mattered without consciously admitting they mattered, which was a very specific kind of self-deception that he had enough self-awareness to recognize and not quite enough courage to fully dismantle. They were professional, completely appropriately professional. They did not have lunch together, did not sit together at the general sessions, did not seek each other out in the conference hallways, in any way that could be read as anything other than colleagues acknowledging each other at a work event. When they passed in the corridor, they said each other's names. When they were in the same meeting, they made eye contact in the normal, functional way of people who know each other. But on the second evening, when most of the conference attendees had migrated to the hotel bar, and Jason was sitting at the far end of it with a glass of water and the kind of low-level headache that comes from 2 days of fluorescent lighting and forced socialization. Megan sat down 2 seats away. Not next to him. 2 seats away. Which was both plausibly deniable and clearly intentional, and Jason appreciated the geometry of it. "How's the site inspection going?" she asked, looking at the bar back rather than at him. "Found a fatigue crack in the number 3 hydraulic line," he said. "Small. Caught early. Good catch." "That sounds serious." "It's serious enough. It's fixed now." "You catch a lot of things early," she said. A statement. Not a compliment. Just an observation. He looked at her profile. She was still watching the bar back. "Sometimes," he said. "How's Lily?" 12 and furious about a math test she studied for and still didn't ace. He paused. "She said, and I quote, 'The test was unfair, Dad. The questions were tricky.' I said, 'That's math, Lil.' She hung up on me." Megan laughed. 2 seats away and laughing at the bar back. "She sounds perfect." "She's impossible," he said. "I love her so much it's actually a medical condition." Megan was quiet for a moment. "Did you tell her about the flight?" she asked. "Some of it. I told her I sat next to someone interesting." "What did she say?" He paused. "She asked if I got her number." Megan turned and looked at him directly for the first time since they'd sat down. 12 years old, she said. "She's an old soul." "What did you tell her?" He held her gaze. "I told her I was working on it." The silence between them had the quality of something that has been said and acknowledged and is now sitting in the open where both parties can see it. "Jason," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. I'm not putting anything on you. I know this week is what it is, and the rest of it is what it is, and Ohio is Ohio and Los Angeles is." "I'm not moving to Los Angeles," she said. He blinked. "I know, I wasn't." "I'm going to Columbus," she said. "The culinary school. It's in Columbus, that's why I applied there." A pause. "Columbus is 40 minutes from Dayton, where your company's main office is." He looked at her. "I'm not saying that's why I applied," she said quickly. "I applied because it's one of the best programs in the Midwest, and because Danny is in Columbus, and because I wanted to be somewhere that felt like home while I'm doing something terrifying." She stopped. "I'm just pointing out that it's 40 minutes. Jason Miller sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. "That's 40 minutes, he said. "I'm aware of the distance, yes." "That's a reasonable drive." "It's a very reasonable drive," she agreed. They looked at each other. "I'm going to accept the offer," she said. It was the first time she'd phrased it that way. Not, "I'm thinking about it." Not, "I might." "I'm going to." "I decided on the plane. I just needed to sit with it for a few days to make sure it was a real decision and not a reaction." And, "It's real," she said. "I'm terrified, but it's real." "Terrified is fine," he said. "Is it? You got on a plane knowing Richard was there. You grabbed a stranger's hand. You told him about culinary school at 2 in the morning." He paused. "Terrified is clearly not a limitation for you. It's just the weather." She smiled, slow and full and unrehearsed. "You need to stop saying things like that." "Why?" "Because I'm trying to have a reasonable, measured, non-impulsive conversation, and you keep making it difficult." "That's fair," he said. "I'll try to be more boring. Thank you." She turned back toward the bar back, but the smile was still there, the residue of it at the corners of her mouth. "I called my mother," she said. He waited. "It took 2 hours," she said. "I told her everything. The real relationship thing. The lie. The flight." She paused. Not all of the flight, but enough of it. The Richard of it." "How did she take it?" "She cried," Megan said, "but not the way I expected. She didn't cry because I lied to her. She cried because—" She stopped. She said, Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy, Megan? Why did you let me keep pushing when you were unhappy?" Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. And I didn't have a good answer. Because the real answer is that I've spent so long managing her worry that I couldn't find a way to add to it, and instead I just lied my way around it, which worried her more in the end. What did she say about culinary school? A pause. She asked why I hadn't told her, Megan said. I said because I was afraid she'd talk me out of it, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, her voice caught just slightly. She said, "I didn't know you thought so little of your own dreams, baby. I thought you didn't have them. I thought you were happy." She exhaled. And then I cried. And she cried. And we were on the phone for 2 hours crying and talking, and it was the most honest conversation I've had with my mother in probably 10 years. Jason said nothing for a moment. "That was worth the 10 hours, he said finally. She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "It was." And then the conference bar filled up around them, and they moved apart back into the ordinary separateness of colleagues at a work event, and the geometry of 2 seats between them maintained itself, and nothing inappropriate happened, and they were both completely professional for the remaining 2.5 days of the conference. But something had changed. The way the weather changes when a front moves through, not the temperature exactly, not anything you can point to. Just the air. Just the quality of the air. They flew home on separate flights. Not by design, their departure times had always been different. His was the early morning flight. Hers was the afternoon. He texted her from the gate. Same airline. Different row this time. She responded within a minute. "How's the window seat?" He looked at the window seat he'd specifically requested and replied, "Empty seat next to me." Weird. Her response, "Get used to it. It won't always be." He read that message 4 times before his boarding group was called. 6 weeks later, Jason Miller drove 40 minutes to Columbus on a Saturday afternoon. He told himself he was going because Danny had needed a recommendation for a good mechanic, and Jason knew one who operated out of Columbus, which was true. He told himself it was practical, sensible, the kind of thing 2 colleagues who had exchanged numbers for professional purposes did without reading anything into it, which was considerably less true. He'd texted Megan the week before, going to be in Columbus Saturday. "Are you around?" She'd texted back, "Danny's having people over for dinner. He says you should come." He'd responded, "He doesn't know me." She'd responded, "He knows about you. Come at 6. He'd thought about that distinction. He knows about you for approximately the entire drive from Dayton to Columbus. Danny Carter opened the door before Jason had finished knocking, which suggested he had been watching from the window, which suggested a level of advanced preparation that Jason found simultaneously endearing and slightly alarming. Danny was 31 years old and had his sister's eyes and none of his sister's reserve. He looked at Jason with the open, uncalculated assessment of someone who has heard a story and is now meeting the person in it, and his face did something uncomplicated and real. "You're the husband," he said. "I was never actually." "You're the husband," Danny said again, in the tone of a man who has already decided on the narrative and is not interested in legal distinctions. He stepped back and gestured inside. Come in, come in. Megan's in the kitchen. She's been in the kitchen for 4 hours, which means she's either cooking or nervous, and from the smell of things, it's both." Jason stepped inside. He heard her before he saw her. Not her voice, but the particular sounds of a kitchen in full deployment. The kind of organized intensity that suggested someone doing something they loved with the focus of a person who had spent too long being kept from it. He stood in the doorway. Megan was at the stove with her back to him in jeans and a flannel shirt, with the sleeves pushed up, hair loose in a way he'd never seen it, completely absorbed in whatever she was doing. She looked from behind like an entirely different person from the woman in the blazer who had scanned the cabin for escape routes 6 weeks ago. He searched for the word. She looked like herself. The unmanaged version. The one that existed when nobody needed her to be anything specific. She turned around and saw him, and something happened in her face that she didn't try to manage. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "I know, but you actually—" She stopped. "Put down the wooden spoon. You're here." "I'm here." he said. Danny, who had stationed himself in the doorway behind Jason with the unconcealed interest of a younger sibling who has waited his entire life for exactly this scenario, said helpfully, "The biscuits are in the oven, Meg." "Danny," she said, "just saying. Go away. Technically, it's my apartment." "Danny?" He grinned and disappeared. Jason heard him in the other room saying something to the other guests who had apparently been briefed and were maintaining a collectively innocent silence. Megan looked at Jason. "I made dinner," she said. "I can see that. I mean," she gestured at the stove. "I actually cooked. Real food. Not something from a box. I've been cooking every day for 6 weeks, and I started a food blog, which is the most millennial thing I've ever done, and I haven't told anyone at work yet, and culinary school starts in January." All of this came out in a rush, like she'd been holding it and needed it to move. January. I submitted my enrollment paperwork on a Tuesday morning. Not 2 a.m. A Tuesday morning. Like a person who has made a decision. He looked at her for a long moment. "Like a person who has made a decision," he said. "Yes. How does it feel?" She thought about it honestly the way she always did. "Terrifying," she said. "And right. Both at the same time, all the time." "Yeah," he said. "That's what right usually feels like." She looked at him with that open, unmanaged expression, the one he'd seen in row 24 at 30,000 feet, when the pretending had stopped and the true thing had started. "Lily," she said suddenly. "How is she?" "She aced the math retest," he said. "She texted me 14 exclamation points." "Did you tell her that was excessive?" "I told her it was perfectly appropriate." Megan smiled. "Good answer." "She asked about you," he said. The smile softened into something more careful. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were doing something brave," he said. "She asked what. I said you were starting over in a direction that actually fit. She said..." He paused. "She said that sounded like something from one of the books in the school counselor's office." Megan laughed. "She's right. She said it like a compliment. The school counselor is apparently a very wise woman named Ms. Patterson, who once told Lily that the hardest thing in the world is knowing who you are and refusing to be something else." He paused. "Lily said that reminded her of whatever I'd told her about you." Something moved through Megan's face that was too complex and too honest to be described as simply as it deserved. "Jason," she said. "Yeah." "I'm scared," she said. "Of culinary school. Of all of it. Culinary school and Columbus and starting over and..." She stopped. "And this. Whatever this is." "I know," he said. "I don't know how to do this without editing myself. I've been editing myself since I was 20 years old, and I don't know if I remember how to just be, without managing it." "You remember," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you did it for 10 hours at 30,000 feet, he said. "You just need more practice at ground level." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't want to be a project," she said. "I don't want to be someone's reclamation story. I don't want someone who loves the idea of helping me figure out who I am." "I don't want that either," he said. "Then what do you want?" He thought about it. He was a precise thinker, and imprecise answers made him uncomfortable, and this question deserved the most precise answer he could give. "I want to have dinner with a woman who has biscuits in the oven, and a food blog, and a culinary school acceptance letter, and a brother named Danny, who is definitely listening from the next room," he said. "And I want to drive 40 minutes again in a few weeks and do it again. And I want to call Lily on the way home and tell her I had a good time, which will be true. And I want to see what that looks like over time without either of us managing it into a shape it's not supposed to be." She stared at him. In the next room, they heard Danny say very quietly to whoever was sitting near him, "Told you." Megan closed her eyes for approximately 2 seconds. When she opened them, she said, "I'm going to need you to leave the kitchen for 20 minutes while I finish this dinner so I don't burn anything, because this conversation is occupying a significant amount of my attention." "Completely reasonable," Jason said. "Danny will entertain you." "I have no doubt. He's going to ask you things. Personal things. He has no filter." "I'll survive." She picked up her wooden spoon, turned back toward the stove. Her shoulders had dropped 2 inches from where they'd been when he'd walked in. Her spine was straight, but not rigid. She was, he thought, the most at home he had ever seen another person. He turned to leave the kitchen, and she said without turning around, "Jason?" "Yeah. I'm glad you came." He stopped in the doorway. "Me too," he said. And then he went and met Danny, who did in fact have no filter, and who asked him within 3 minutes what his intentions were, and who laughed so hard at Jason's response that his guests in the living room asked what was funny, and who told his sister 2 months later unprompted that he'd known from the handshake. The biscuits, when they came out, were not perfect. They were slightly irregular, and one of them had developed a crack along the top, and they were a little more golden on the bottom than ideal. Danny declared them better than their grandmother's. Megan said that was a lie. Danny said some lies were worth telling. And Jason, sitting at the kitchen table in Columbus on a Saturday evening with people he had not known 6 weeks ago, eating biscuits that were slightly imperfect and completely real, thought about a window seat on a 10-hour flight, and a woman who had grabbed his hand out of desperation and told him the truest things about herself. He thought about how the maps are always wrong about something, how the place is still real whether the map matches or not, how you have to walk it yourself. He looked around the table at Danny's laughter and Megan's unrehearsed smile and the particular warmth of a room full of people who are not managing themselves for anyone's benefit, and he thought, this is what it looks like when the instructions are wrong and the life is right. He was going to have to find a way to explain that to Lily. He had a feeling she already knew. January came the way January always does in Ohio, without apology, without warmth, with the specific gray determination of a month that has nothing to prove and knows it. Jason dropped Megan off at the culinary school orientation on a Tuesday morning. He pulled up to the entrance, put the truck in park, and sat there with the engine running while she looked at the building through the windshield, with the expression of a person standing at the edge of something they've wanted for so long that wanting it had become more familiar than the possibility of having it. She didn't move. I didn't say anything. He'd learned in the 4 months since a Columbus Saturday and a table full of slightly imperfect biscuits when to speak and when to simply be present. It was the most useful thing he'd learned about Megan Carter, that she didn't need to be managed through her fear. She just needed someone to sit in it with her until she was ready to move. 40 seconds. He counted. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She picked up her bag, opened the door, then stopped 1 foot on the pavement and turned back to look at him. "Tell me something true," she said. It was what they did now. It had started on the plane, that exchange of plain, unglamorous truths, and somewhere between Los Angeles and Columbus, it had become their language, the thing they said when the other needed grounding. He thought for exactly 1 second. "You have been cooking for other people your whole life as a way of loving them," he said. "Now you're going to learn to do it for yourself. That's not starting over. That's finishing what you started." She held his gaze. "That was a good one," she said. "I've been practicing." She got out of the truck. She walked toward the entrance without looking back, which was exactly right. He'd told her once months ago that looking back while you're still moving is how people walk into things. She'd remembered. She walked straight and steady, like a woman who has made a real decision and is now living inside it. He watched until the door closed behind her. Then he put the truck in drive, pulled out of the lot, and called Lily on the way to the office. "She went in?" Lily asked without even saying hello. "She went in." "Good." A pause. "Was she scared?" "Very." "Good," Lily said again. "Scared means it matters." Jason drove in silence for a moment. "When did you get so wise?" "Ms. Patterson," Lily said like it was obvious. "Also you. Also just, I pay attention, Dad." "Yeah," he said. "You do." He hung up and drove the rest of the way to work with the particular quiet of a man who is aware that his life has changed and is still in the process of catching up to that awareness. The 6 months that followed were not easy. Nobody tells you that about the life that fits. That fitting doesn't mean effortless. It means the struggle is worth it, which is a different thing entirely. Megan's culinary program was demanding in the way that real learning is demanding, not punishing, but full. She had homework and practicals and technique assessments, and days when she came home to her apartment, smelling like spent oil, and the specific physical exhaustion of someone who has been on their feet for 9 hours. She had moments of pure, unguarded joy, calling Jason at 10 p.m. to describe the texture of a perfect beurre blanc she'd finally gotten right, her voice carrying the specific warmth of someone doing something they were born to do. And she had moments of doubt calling him at 11 p.m. to say she was the oldest person in her cohort by 6 years, and wondering in the particular low-grade despair of a tired Tuesday night if she'd waited too long. "You're the only one in your cohort," he said on one of those nights, who has managed client relationships, held together a major aerospace project, and told a senior vice president exactly what he was doing wrong in a pressurized cabin at 30,000 feet. "You're not behind. You're the only person in that room who actually knows what pressure looks like." She was quiet on the other end of the line. "Are you going to do that every time?" she asked. "Do what?" "Say the exact right thing." "I practice," he said. "I know you practice, Jason, but at some point you have to admit it's also just you." He didn't have an answer for that. He filed it away. The 40-minute drive became a ritual. He made it most weekends, sometimes bringing Lily, who had decided with the decisive certainty of a 12-year-old who has made up her mind that Megan was a person worth knowing. The first time he'd have brought her, Megan had been nervous in a way she tried not to show, and Lily had walked into Danny's apartment and immediately asked Megan what she was cooking, and within 20 minutes they were side by side at the kitchen counter with Lily learning how to properly mince garlic, and Jason sat at the table and felt something in his chest that was too large and too specific for a general word like happiness. Danny had looked at him from across the table and said quietly, "You know you're done for, right?" Jason had said since the plane. Danny had nodded like this confirmed everything he already knew. That was October. By November, Lily had started calling Megan on her own without Jason, without arrangement, to talk about school and cooking and the social catastrophes of 7th grade and other things that Jason was not always given the full details of, which he found both slightly alarming and entirely correct. Megan had become incrementally, and without announcement, a person that Lily turned toward. Not to replace anything, nobody was replacing anything, but to add to it. To expand what was available. Jason watched this happen with the patient attention he gave to things he didn't want to rush. And then came the night that changed the architecture of everything. It was a Thursday in December, 2 weeks before Christmas, and Megan had called him at 9:30, which was not unusual, but her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in months, that tight managed flatness of someone holding something in. "Can you talk?" she asked. "Always," he said. A pause. "My mother called." He waited. "She talked to Richard," Megan said. Jason went still. "About what?" "He reached out to her last week. She didn't tell me right away because she wasn't sure how to." Another pause. "He told her he owed her an apology. He told her that he'd used her concern for me in a way that wasn't right. He said he'd been in a lot of boardrooms for a long time and had stopped being able to tell the difference between persuading people and pressuring them." Her voice was careful. "He said he was sorry. To her. And he asked her to pass it on to me." Jason was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about a man standing in an airplane aisle, his script finally gone, saying, "I hope the project goes well," in the quiet voice of someone who has just seen themselves clearly for the first time in a while. "What did your mother say to you?" he asked. "She said—" Megan stopped. He heard her take a breath. "She said that for a long time she'd been so worried about me being alone that she'd pushed me toward things that weren't right for me. And she said she was sorry about that. And then she said—" Her voice caught, just slightly. "She said, 'Tell me about the man on the plane, Megan. Tell me all of it.'" He let the silence hold for a moment. "Did you?" he asked. "I told her everything," she said. "The real everything this time. The hand, the 10 hours, Richard and Patricia, and the flight tracker, and the all of it." A pause. And she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "He sounds like someone who knows how to show up." Megan's voice had gone soft in a way that was not managed. "And I said yes, he does. Something moved through Jason that he didn't immediately have a classification for. Not sentiment, he was too practical for sentiment. Not pride, he hadn't done anything worth pride. Something more like recognition. The feeling of being accurately described by someone who knows you. "She wants to meet you," Megan said. "Okay," he said. "That was fast." "You just told me your mother said I know how to show up," he said. "The appropriate response to that is to show up." She laughed. The full, unrehearsed version. "Christmas," she said. "She does Christmas big. Fair warning. There will be cousins. Many cousins. Danny's coming, obviously. My Aunt Ruth will ask you about your retirement plan within the first 20 minutes. I am not exaggerating." "I have a very good retirement plan," he said. "Please tell Aunt Ruth that. She'll love you immediately." "Done." He paused. "Can I bring Lily?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly long enough to be significant. Jason, she said. "Too soon." "No," she said. "Not too soon. She stopped. "Yes. Bring Lily. Please bring Lily." A pause. "I already bought her a Christmas present. I bought it 3 weeks ago. I was going to figure out a natural way to give it to her, but there is no natural way, so I'm just telling you." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you get her?" "A really good chef's knife," she said. "The kind you'd buy for an actual chef, and a cutting board, and a notebook for recipes because she told me she's been trying to write down my recipes from memory, and I want her to have the real ones." Jason Miller, who had learned to diffuse pressurized hydraulic systems, and who had held himself together through things that would have broken other men, sat on the edge of his bed in his quiet Ohio house, and was for approximately 15 seconds completely unable to speak. "Jason," she said. "Yeah," he said. His voice was fine. "It was fine." Yeah. She's going to love that." "Are you okay?" "Yes," he said. "I'm very okay." She didn't push it. She never pushed the things he needed to hold for a moment. She just waited, and he was grateful for it, the same way he'd been grateful on the plane when she hadn't said she was sorry about Susan, when she'd held the complicated things complicated instead of resolving them. "Tell me something true," he said. She didn't hesitate. "I haven't edited myself once today," she said. "Not once. And it's almost 10 p.m. and I'm in my apartment in Columbus, and I'm tired from 9 hours on my feet, and I talked to my mother, and I told you about the knife, and I haven't edited any of it." A pause. "That's the longest streak I've had since I was 18. He smiled in the dark of his bedroom. "That's everything," he said. "Yeah," she said softly. "It is." Christmas at Megan's mother's house in Cincinnati was as promised enormous and loud and full of cousins, and Aunt Ruth did ask Jason about his retirement plan within 18 minutes of meeting him, which he found not alarming, but entirely charming, and he gave her the full answer, complete with his pension details, and she declared him in front of the assembled family a sensible man, which appeared to be the highest possible endorsement available. Lily moved through the family with the specific ease of a kid who has grown up as the only child of a single father in a quiet house, and therefore finds other people's noise not overwhelming, but genuinely interesting. She sat with Danny for an hour and a half, and he taught her a card trick, and she beat him at it 3 times in a row, and he declared her his favorite person at the table, which Megan said later was the highest honor Danny had ever bestowed. And Lily had texted her school friends from the bathroom that she'd gotten in with the coolest family. Megan's mother was a small, precise woman named Gloria, who moved through her own kitchen with the authority of someone who has never questioned her jurisdiction over it, and who looked at Jason with the careful, measuring quality of a woman who loves her daughter very much and has made some mistakes in service of that love and is trying to do better. She shook his hand at the door and said simply, "She talks about you differently than she's talked about anyone." "How does she talk about other people?" he asked. "Carefully," Gloria said. "She talks about you like she's not thinking about how it sounds." He held the old woman's gaze. "That means a lot," he said, "coming from you." Gloria looked at him for a long moment, and whatever she was measuring, she appeared to find it sufficient because she nodded once and said, Come in, dinner's in an hour, and my sister's husband will try to argue with you about football. So just agree with everything he says, and you'll be fine." He agreed with everything Aunt Ruth's husband said about football, and was fine. The dinner was by any objective measure the loudest, most chaotic, most food-dense meal Jason Miller had attended since his own family Christmases as a child, before his parents had aged and the gatherings had shrunk, and the particular warm noise of a full table had become something he associated with the past rather than the present. He sat across from Lily, who was engaged in a fierce and apparently deeply important conversation with Danny about something to do with competitive cooking shows. And beside Megan, whose shoulder was almost touching his, in the way that proximity becomes habitual when two people have stopped calculating it. At some point during the meal, Megan's cousin asked how they'd met, and Jason said simply, "We sat next to each other on a flight." And Megan said without missing a beat, "He held my hand." And Danny said, "She grabbed it." And Megan said, "That's not." And Danny said, "She absolutely grabbed it." And the whole table laughed, and nobody asked for more detail than that, because somehow the abbreviated version, the plane, the hand, the 40 minutes contained enough truth to stand on its own. That was the night later agreed upon by both parties that things became something they were going to have to name. It happened quietly, not dramatically. The cousins were doing something loud in the next room, and Lily had commandeered Danny for another card game, and Gloria was in her kitchen with her sister, and Jason and Megan ended up on the back porch because the house had become warm with bodies and noise, and she'd slipped out and he'd followed without thinking. And they stood in the December cold without coats, because neither of them had planned to be out here, and neither of them wanted to go back in yet. She was looking up. He was looking at her, looking up. "I think I was looking for a reason not to want this," she said. He waited. "From the beginning. From the plane." She turned to look at him. "I kept waiting for the thing that would make it less than it was. The complication. The part where it turns out you have a different picture in your head of who I'm supposed to be." She paused. "I kept waiting to need to edit myself." "And," he said. "And it's been 8 months," she said. "And I'm standing on my mother's porch in December without a coat, and I'm completely myself, and you're looking at me like that?" She gestured at his expression, which he didn't try to adjust. "And there's no edit. There's nothing to fix." Her voice had gone quiet. "I don't know what to do with that." "Yes, you do," he said. She looked at him. "You do exactly what you've been doing," he said. "You show up, you don't manage it, you let it be what it is." He held her gaze. "It's real, Megan. That's all it is. It's just real." She was very still for a moment in the December dark. And then she said, "I love you." Not as a performance. Not built up to, with the appropriate narrative architecture of a love confession. No trembling, no orchestration, no careful management of the moment. Just the plain, unprompted truth of a woman who has spent 8 months waiting for herself to be wrong about something and has finally run out of reasons to wait. He didn't say anything for a moment. Not because he didn't have an answer. Because he wanted to give the answer the weight it deserved. "I know," he said. And then, "I love you too. I have since somewhere over Arizona." She laughed. It came out broken and full at the same time, the way laughter does when it's competing with something more serious. "Arizona," she said. "You fell asleep," he said. "And you stopped performing. And I thought, oh, there she is." She was looking at him with the open, undefended expression that he had first seen at 30,000 feet and had been careful with ever since the one that existed when she'd stopped calculating the distance between who she was and who the room needed. "There she is," she repeated softly. "Right here," he said. The whole time. They went back inside because they had no coats, and it was December, which was practical and correct. And because the noise and warmth of the house was exactly the right place to be, which was also correct. But he held her hand on the way back in. And she let him. And nobody was watching, and it didn't matter because it wasn't for anyone else. 3 months later, on a March Saturday, that was trying its cautious best to suggest spring might eventually arrive. Jason Miller drove the familiar 40 minutes to Columbus and brought Lily, and after dinner, Danny took Lily to see something in the city. The nature of which was never fully clarified, but which had been coordinated in advance. Jason understood, because Lily texted him at 7:30 that Danny was, and he was quoting her directly, genuinely hilarious and also very good at bowling, and Megan in the kitchen, that had become the center of everything. The place where she'd found her own language again, made dinner from scratch, while Jason sat at the counter and watched and talked. And at some point she said, still not looking up from what she was working on, in the casual, certain voice of a woman who has made a real decision, "I want to open a restaurant." He said nothing for a moment. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. The concept she'd been building in her head for months, small neighborhood scale, the kind of place where you could bring your mother and your brother and sit for 2 hours without feeling rushed. The menu that was built around the food she'd been learning to love. Making comfort food with actual technique underneath it. The kind of cooking that looked effortless because of how much work was invisible in it. The location she'd been eyeing in Columbus, a small storefront 2 blocks from Danny's school. She talked for 20 minutes, and he listened. The way Susan used to listen, completely still, the full weight of his attention on her, so that she could feel it. When she stopped, she said, "Is that insane?" "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "It's also completely right," he said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She held his gaze. "Will you help me? Not financially? I'm not asking for that. I have savings, and there are small business grants, and Danny said he'd—" "Megan," he said. "What?" "However you need help," he said. "Whatever that looks like, I'm in." She stared at him for a moment with an expression he recognized, the one that was still slightly surprised, even after 8 months, to encounter someone who didn't require her to shrink the ask before she made it. "You don't even know what I'm going to need yet," she said. "No," he said. "But I know you. And I know how you work, and I know that whatever you build is going to be worth showing up for." He paused. "So I'm in. All the way in. That's just my answer." She turned back to her stove. He saw her shoulders do that thing, drop 2 inches, the tension going out of them that told him more than any words could. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he said. The restaurant opened 11 months later on a November Friday in the small storefront 2 blocks from Danny's school. It seated 32 people. It had a menu that changed seasonally. It was called, after considerable debate and at least one argument that ended in laughter, Seat 24, which Danny had suggested, and which Megan had initially rejected and then accepted because she couldn't find anything that was more true. Lily designed the logo, a small stylized airplane window, with light coming through it on her laptop over a weekend, presented it without preamble, and declared it non-negotiable. Megan looked at it for a long time and said it was perfect. Lily said she knew. On opening night, Gloria sat at table 6 with Aunt Ruth, who had already reviewed the menu twice and pronounced it ambitious, which was her highest form of praise. Danny moved between the kitchen and the dining room with the barely suppressed energy of a man who had been waiting for this specific night since a December porch conversation he'd been told about but had already suspected. The cousins occupied 2 tables and were collectively responsible for more enthusiasm than the fire code probably permitted. Lily worked the bread service because she'd asked to, and Megan had taught her, and she was objectively the best part of the dining experience, which she was aware of. Jason sat at the counter near the kitchen, past the same place he'd sat every Saturday for 11 months watching Megan work, and he watched the room fill with people eating food that had been made with genuine love by a woman who had spent too long believing that love was something you gave away, but were not permitted to build a life around. Megan came out of this kitchen once, midway through service, wearing her chef's whites with the ease of someone who has finally put on clothes that fit. She looked at the room, at her mother and her brother and the cousins, and Lily doing bread service with genuine authority. And then she looked at Jason. He was already looking at her. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Some things, after enough time and enough truth and enough 40-minute drives and enough Saturday kitchens and enough plain, honest conversations, don't need words. They just need the person to be there, looking back steady and real and not going anywhere. She went back into the kitchen. He picked up his coffee. 6 months after the restaurant opened, on a Tuesday evening after service, when the dining room was empty and the kitchen had been broken down and Danny had gone home and Lily was at her friend's house for the night, Megan sat down across from Jason at the counter with 2 cups of tea and said without preamble, in the same direct voice she'd used the first time on a plane, 8 years of herself packed into 4 words, "Marry me, for real this time." He looked at her. She looked back. Not performing anything. Not managing it. Just Megan Carter, 35 years old chef and restaurant owner, and the bravest person he'd ever sat next to on an airplane, asking for exactly what she wanted in exactly as many words as it required. He said yes, not after a pause, not with ceremony. Just yes, the same way you say it when the answer has been true for so long that saying it out loud is not a decision, but a correction. A bringing into language of something that already existed. In all the other forms, language can't reach. They told Lily that night over the phone because she would have been furious to find out the next morning. She screamed. Loud enough that Jason held the phone away from his ear. Then she said in the rapid, overlapping cadence of a 13-year-old who has strong opinions about everything. Okay, but I'm making something for the wedding and nobody gets a vote on what it is. And also I already told Danny you were going to do this, so he owes me $20. And also Dad, you need a better ring than whatever you're planning. Megan, who was listening, covered her mouth to muffle the laugh. I'm working on it, Jason said. Work faster, Lily said. She deserves the best one. He looked at Megan. Megan was already looking at him. She's not wrong, Megan said. I got a better ring. He worked fast. Lily approved it via a photograph sent to her in math class, which was not supposed to happen, but which she described as a necessary exception. Danny cried when he heard, then denied it, then admitted it, then blamed Jason personally for the situation, which Jason accepted without argument. Gloria said when Megan told her, I knew, from the handshake. Jason, who had been told the same thing by Danny 14 months earlier, chose to believe this was a Carter family gift, rather than a coordinated story, because some fictions are worth keeping. They were married the following October on a Saturday, in a ceremony that lasted 35 minutes, because they had both agreed that the important things had already been said on an airplane, in a Columbus kitchen, on a December porch, at a restaurant counter, in 100 Tuesday phone calls, and in the particular language of two people who had learned to tell each other the truth without flinching. Lily stood beside them, holding a small bunch of wildflowers that she had arranged herself and declared perfect, which they were. Jason Miller, at 45, had a daughter who set calendar reminders out of love and described things accurately and designed logos that looked like light through a window. He had a wife who cooked for 32 people on Friday nights and called him at 10 p.m. to describe the texture of things she'd gotten exactly right. He had a brother-in-law who owed Lily Carter Miller $20 and was late paying. He had, in other words, a life. Not the one any map had described. Not the one the instructions had indicated. Not the one that could have been predicted from a window seat and a thermos of black coffee and a paperback novel he'd already read twice. The life that fit. The one that had started when a woman grabbed his hand at 32,000 feet and told him the truest things she knew, and he had listened. Really listened the way Susan had taught him without ever teaching it, the way Lily had learned without being told, and had said, tell me another one. That was the whole story. That was all of it. A seat on a plane, a hand in his. 10 hours of truth, and everything that follows when you stop managing the distance between who you are and who you're allowed to be, and simply choose for the first time to close it.